Welcome to the first YouTube video for our class in Programming Management, Youth and Family. And what we're going to do is this. We're going to take a look at what we did at the residential. For those who were there, it'll be a refresher. For those who weren't able to be there, this will help you see, hear, and understand the big idea behind the residential and behind this course. And so it comes out of years of ministry. 25 years I've been involved in youth ministry. A church of 75 in Virginia, a church of 1,000 in Indiana, a church of 5,000 in San Diego. My time here at IWU also includes working with multiple churches in the area in their youth ministry as well. And in all of those different ministry contexts, there's no question on why we do what we do. That seems pretty obvious. Or where we do it, that depends on where we are. I mean, that one's pretty simple to kind of think through and manage. Or what. The what and the how seem to really get messed around with a lot. Or changed, or abbreviated, or questioned, or the list goes on and on. How do we do this thing? And there has to be some kind of biblical model. There has to be something that helps us all see ministry under one light. There's got to be something that unifies us. And so I was messing around with Jesus. And how did Jesus do things? I've been lucky enough to go to Israel a couple different times and retrace his steps and see some things that were pretty amazing. I've been to the very spot where the feeding of the 5,000 took place and in the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee and outside of Capernaum and what that was like and to go to the upper room, and to read passages out of Luke and talk about the 70 and how they were brought together and called and sent. Of course, we know about the 12 and the disciples. I mean, that one is pretty obvious. We know about Peter, James, and John and their role within the context of ministry with Jesus and the disciples and this greater group. And of course, there is this unique relationship with Peter. In fact, if I mess around with this, I see that, again, if you go to Matthew 14, that's just one example of the thousands that were gathered to hear, to see, to experience Jesus. There's no possible way that many people, even if the historians are right, that's 5,000 men, not including everybody else. So say there's 20,000 people gathered. It doesn't really matter to me that exact detail. What matters to me is the principle behind this. And it was very clear that a lot of people wanted to see what the big deal was. They wanted to find out who is this Jesus. They've heard stories. The reputation of him doing miraculous things is spreading all across that area. And people want to know. They want to see, is he real? Will he do another miracle? I mean, a lot of people were gathered at the feeding of the 5,000 who did not know, trust, or even believe in Jesus. We know that you think about Matthew 4 and what's taking place in Matthew when Jesus calls the disciples. I mean, that's a pretty easy one to go to. We can think about Luke 10. Again, that's when he calls the 70. And so the 70 are called and sent. That's a larger group than this 12. That's a different group than this 5,000. We can think about the other things that we see specifically in Scripture. We know in Luke 24, at the ascension, the way Jesus talked to that small group of gathered people that as he ascends up into heaven, he blesses them and they worship him and they go back. And the church is launched in that specific way. I mean, it's a very important time in history when Jesus ascends and that group goes back and now it's them. We know about Matthew 17 where Jesus and Peter go to pay temple tax, and a lot of people point to that as an incredible moment that tells us that Peter obviously was a lead disciple and had a special relationship with Jesus. I mean, you can go to Capernaum right now and you can see where Jesus lived with Peter, his wife, and Peter's mother-in-law's house. And so you have these things taking place that have different purposes. The purpose of this had to be totally different than the purpose of this, which was different than this purpose or this purpose or this purpose. When you think about Matthew 14, after this takes place, what happens with Peter? That incredible moment when he steps out of the boat? I mean, that's a pretty significant piece of history with Jesus and Peter. And of course, it was witnessed by a lot of other people too, who are wanting to be in that kind of relationship and role. And so clearly, I can see a couple things developing here. And let me mess around with some words that make sense today. There's no question in my mind that the feeding of the 5,000, Sermon on the Mount that took place in so many different contexts. A lot of people think it was maybe expressed 9, 10, 11 times. But there was a component of evangelism outreach that's unmistakable, that Jesus is introducing himself to people who don't know. We know that 70, that's not this group. That 70 had a different relationship with Jesus. They were in fellowship. There was this idea of understanding who Jesus is, which is worship, and where they're embracing his way and who he is. So the word worship and word seem really clear to me. What happened in so many contexts here was different than what happened here, but they happened nonetheless. They were happening in a continual secular fashion. We keep on going back to discipleship and accountability. I mean, what happened between Jesus and those disciples was pretty unique. It was different than this, and there's no question it was different than that. To some degree, it was deeper. There was more accountability involved. Again, Peter, James, and John, even a deeper level of leadership and training that took place. And Jesus along with Peter, this idea of this mentorship and level of responsibility that was greater than it was for this group or for this group or for this group or for this group. And so I see clearly that there is this idea that there's this evangelism, this connection, this relationship, this outreach, whatever word you want to use. I don't care about the semantics right now. Jesus is introducing himself to people who don't know him. Jesus is in a relationship with a group of people, and they're embracing not only who he is, but they're following in his footsteps in a larger context. We can see this discipleship component where Jesus is spending an exorbitant amount of time with this group of people. And the level of accountability is extraordinary. We know that Jesus is connecting with people at even a deeper level of leadership and training. And again, there's no denying the special relationship with Jesus and Peter. So I see these 5 components at play consistently through Scripture. And it is not linear. This is happening at the same time this is happening, 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 at the same time this is happening. It's all flowing through Jesus. In fact, you think about all those people gathered, hungry. They don't have anything to eat. It's pretty clear when you read that story, that account. Jesus tells them to go get some fish, the bread. They bring back this little measly portion. How did this group think that they were going to feed that many people based on what they knew, what they understood? Well, because it didn't flow through him. Jesus made it really clear. As he is doing this amazing thing, this miracle, this group of people is learning a huge lesson. At the same time that this is taking place, these people are present there. These people are present there. This guy's in the middle of it. This was all happening at the same time. Jesus is introducing himself to a lot of people. The disciples are learning, growing. This group is in the middle of it and experiencing what's taking place. These guys begin to understand what it means to take ownership and leadership. And Peter, his relationship with Jesus and his role in all of this is being solidified. That is unmistakable. It is clear to me that Jesus continually reached out to people who didn't know him, connected, worshiped, and invested in this larger group of people that we call the 120 or the 70. His relationship with disciples, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Same thing with Peter, James, and John. Same things with Peter. So how can we reflect this in our program, in our local context? Whether that's a church or a parachurch organization, I don't care. To me, there's a biblical model that is laid out clearly and specifically. And I think it's our task to mimic that. Let me throw this out here. This is me. I think the reason why it's really, really hard for us to kind of come to grips with that biblical model is because of our gifts and our talents, our tendencies, things that we just learned, things that we've known about for a long time, things that we are really engaging in, even a class like this, things that we were taught before, gatherings that we go to from experts who teach us, trends that are current and relevant for the moment. And for me, these things can sometimes kind of get us off track of going back and saying, is there a biblical example of Jesus and the way he did ministry that we should mimic? Let me go back to this. I think what happens is all of us, even me, have gifts and our talent. And those gifts and talents sometimes disguise us from a biblical example, because we can go back and say, I've got the gift of discipleship. I mean, I love this so much. This resonates with who I am. It's a gift I have. It's a talent that I have. It's my tendency. It's what I've known about. It's what we talked about in school. I even went to a discipleship conference. You know, I can find any book that can tell me that there's trends about that even today. And so for me, what did Jesus do? Jesus did discipleship. What should we do then? We should be a church about discipleship, and we should die on the hill of discipleship. And discipleship is what Jesus did, therefore it's what I'm going to do. And then, of course, somebody else comes along and says, you know what my gifts and talents are? My tendencies? Man, it's about evangelism. Jesus went out and found the lost sheep. Jesus cared about people who are lost. If you really want to be like Jesus, if you really care about mimicking Jesus, then it has to be about reaching out to the lost. It's about evangelism. I have the gifts, and that's my talent, and that's my tendency, and I'm going to a conference that talks about evangelism and trends that take place there. And in school, it was a strong evangelistic school, and it's something that somebody I know from the past was really passionate about. And so if you really want to be biblical, if you really want to do what Jesus did, you have to be committed to evangelism. That's what our church is going to do. Our church is based on evangelism. That's who we are. We're going to die on the hill of evangelism. And it goes on and on and on. If you're really into worship and that gathering, then what we're really about is this, because that's what Jesus did. And if it's really about leadership, I mean, what your church needs to be about, because it might be kind of your gift or your talent and your tendency, something that was learned, something that is experienced, something that you resonate with. And then we can go back and prove it. We can prove that it should be all about discipleship because that's what Jesus did. We can go back and prove it was all about evangelism because that's what Jesus did. We can go back and prove that it's about developing leaders. It's about mentoring. If you're not doing this, then you're not doing it biblically. The problem is when we take these things right here and say it's more about discipleship than it is about evangelism. It's more about evangelism than it is about worship and the word. It's more about this than it is leadership. It's more about mentoring than it is about reaching out to others. How is that okay? There's a biblical example that supersedes all of this. I see it pretty clear. Jesus specifically did these things all at the same time, continually. And I think that we should develop a program for our local church or our context that expresses those 5 areas consistently and continually. And this is the foundation of this course. Can we come together and have one biblical idea in common? It's not about our style of worship or our style of evangelism or our style of discipleship or the way we train leaders or the way we dig deep in mentorship and the exact words we use. It's that we are doing evangelism. We're committed to the gathering, the worship, and the word. We're developing these deep relationships and accountability and discipleship. We're training and setting out people in leadership. And we're getting way down in the nitty-gritty of mentoring. That's it. Is there enough evidence in Scripture, in the life of Jesus, that makes it crystal clear for us that we can't pick one and say that's what it's about? That we have to embrace all of these and represent all of these in our ministry program. I love Robert Coleman when he talks about in Master Plan of Discipleship and Master Plan of Evangelism that evangelism begets discipleship, discipleship begets evangelism. He's saying this in this whole context. You can't have one without the other because they all complement each other. So that's it. That's the end of this little video segment. And I'll follow this up with some instructions that I'll put up online.